But
that ain't cool. But
the one thing I did see Brig brought up that I thought was really interesting is a whole bunch of like particularly liberals who are like really mad that this dude's like, dude, just integrate into the culture. Like bodegas are the thing. But like if a conservative made that same argument about like America, people would be very mad.
Yeah.
It's like if Donald Trump was like, you just need to, when you come to America, you integrate to become American.
Yeah.
And people are like, no. But they're telling the same dudes like, you need to integrate into that culture. It's like, what? Like at least
that's awesome.
that is
awesome.
so perfect. It's because you always have those guys that are like, well, if you don't like America, you can just get out.
Yeah, but
it's like, no, bro, that's not how this works.
Yeah,
but like I get the sense. Well, but in New
America,
York City,
love it or leave it.
Yeah, if you come to New York City, you better assimilate or get the fuck out.
Yeah,
that's awesome. That is awesome.
Oh, sorry, we've got off on a tangent. What are we going to talk about during part 2 of this deal, man?
Part 2, we're going to go over some Supreme Court cases. So first, I wanted to get your take on some of the ones that we've talked about already, right? We've talked about the Dobbs case already, and then the gun case in New York. It's with the gun and pistol club versus whatever. It's a fucking long-ass name. That's why I haven't been able to.
It's a long one.
Yeah,
it really
so
is.
we talked, I think for like 2 or 3 episodes, we talked about the Dobbs case. Obviously, we'll talk about it again, but I want to get your take on it, and then also for you to talk more about your difficulties in the civics department of people not understanding, because we talked a lot about kind of comparing and contrasting the New York gun case with the Dobbs case and how they kind of overlapped a little bit. So I wanted to get your take first on the Dobbs case, then we'll talk about the New York gun case.
So the Dobbs one's really interesting because I guess my thoughts on it are like, I guess there's a lot because first let's talk about like the initial case. So you had Roe versus Wade within the 1970s, which decided that abortion was legal under the concept of privacy.
Yes,
I think based on the 14th Amendment, and then that was overturned with the Dobbs decision just a couple weeks ago.
As well as just not to interrupt you, but just to add, as well as the 9th Amendment right and the enumerated rights found in the Constitution. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of the base, and that's kind of the big distinction that we drew when talking about it between the 2nd Amendment and the 9th Amendment was kind of the big distinction that we drew. So that's the only reason I stopped you to add that.
Thank you. Yeah. So a lot of people are arguing that like one of the big difficulties of the Roe decision is that a lot of people, especially conservatives, saw it as like legislating from the bench.
Yeah.
And so the Supreme Court, the 7 versus 2, I think, they essentially decided to make a right that wasn't necessarily in the Constitution, make it a right in the Constitution, and that was overturned versus Dobbs. And I guess my thought is, I don't know. I think my issue with this is like I don't necessarily like I'm against it, but I don't think abortion is something that can really be left up to the states, because if you think that abortion is murder, how do you have a system where it's okay to murder people in some states but not okay to murder people in another?
Right. Yeah, it's a very common argument for conservatives a lot.
Yeah, like there are some conservatives that truly wanted to go up to the state, but a majority of them, this is a moral issue. This is the idea that like, are we a nation that says we should be able to kill our unborn children?
Right.
And so it's not up to the states. Like it's very obviously this is something that needs to be federally decided. Just like I kind of going back to like the issue of slavery, like this is an issue you can't have up to the states. Like over time, this is going to boil into an issue that like we'll have to decide at the federal level.
And we've seen already in the 3 weeks or whatever since the decision, the inconsistency in one state to the next one has been driving people crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's mass confusion, chaos between can I travel, can I not travel? Can we take these drugs here? Can we send these drugs here? Can we do this? Can we not do this? Am I gonna go to jail if I help somebody come here, or if I let them stay at my house, or if those type of things? And those issues, interstate issues, can really only be solved on the federal level with the interstate commerce. Like that's really the only way for those things to be solved. So I think there's a lot of merit to what you're saying, that it eventually has to be solved at the federal level.
Yeah. And it just seems like it's not. It seems like a lot of people are saying like this is the end, but it really seems like the beginning of a new fight, because I feel like ultimately it's something, because like what happens when the Republicans take power? Let's say Trump wins 2024, you get a Republican Senate and a Republican House. there's a base that is going to call for a national abortion ban.
Yep.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as it happened, Mike Pence was coming out saying
Yeah.
that we needed to do it. So
Mike Pence.
And so it just seems like it wasn't an issue of the states. This is fundamentally an issue of two different sides seeing an issue morally. And so I just ultimately like the Dobbs decision. It seems like, while one could argue that it was correctly decided, because I do think the argument of legislating from the bench is undemocratic, but it has happened.
yes,
For a long time.
Yeah, a lot. It has had surprising amount.
unarguably, yeah.
But it's just like this issue of like sometimes democracy can't like sometimes the best thing is the most democratic thing. Because I think of like interracial marriage. When Loving versus Virginia came out in like the 1960s, interracial marriage was only approved by like 20% of Americans. Like, that was an incredibly unpopular decision.
Yeah.
But it was the right decision.
Yep.
Right.
And living in the year 2022, we can't objectively, like, that was the right decision.
Yeah.
And if the court went off of popular opinion, went off this idea that like, well, we can't do that, then they would have made like a poor decision.
Right, and that's sorry. Go ahead.
It's just hard. Like, I'm glad I'm not a Supreme Court justice, because like it seems like you have to like these 9 people simultaneously have more power than like Congress, and it's even the president. I argue, like, in a lot of like these, obviously they're more powerful than I think the Constitution intended. Like, obviously,
Depending on how
Court?
they're
Yeah, the Supreme
used,
Court.
I would say. Because, so, I would say, working off of that, in an ideal world, the Supreme Court should be nothing but a reflection of what the federal legislature has passed
Yeah, that's
through law, right?
Yeah.
It should do nothing but tell you what the Congress has made law. And in this particular case, I would argue that they made a correct ruling on the legality of things because we don't have any federal laws necessarily that say this is what we have in place. These are state laws, and we have general guidelines and this and that, but there's no right ensconced anywhere. There's none of that. And the Supreme Court just says, this is what you got. I understand that it might not be what people want. Some people do, some people don't, but it's not the Supreme Court's job to do that. And unfortunately, we get a mix and match of sometimes the Supreme Court legislates from the bench, and sometimes they don't, and it goes back and forth depending on who's there and what particular case it is. But I think in a perfect world, the Supreme Court their whole job is essentially reflect the state of the current federal legislation against the Constitution and tell you whether or not it's constitutional or not, and then according to the laws that you have that you are running through this case, it's either constitutional or it's not. And I can understand how people get upset about that, obviously, but from from the way it's supposed to work, in this particular case, I felt like it worked the way it was supposed to. Whether or not we all like it or not, that's up to us to internalize.
Right.
But with like Loving v. Virginia, that was also something that I think they definitely ruled correctly, because there was a lot of problems back in those days with like equal protection under the law. I mean, most of the things that dealt with segregation, racial segregation, and just slavery and the whole 9 yards, that's all just, the laws were already there. It was already in the Constitution. Well, actually, in a lot of it, it's already in the Constitution. It's not necessarily even laws. You have unconstitutional laws at that point being overturned by the Supreme Court because the state got it wrong. And in this particular case, the state hasn't done anything. And they just say, no, you can't rely on the ruling from back then because they ruled the wrong way, according to the way the Supreme Court should be doing their job.
Right.
And so I see the conflict. But, when you're talking about whether or not the Supreme Court's doing its job or not, in this particular case, I feel like they did, personally. And when I look at I'm not a constitutional scholar by any means, but we have these weird amendments that get a little gray with like the equal protection clauses and the what is that, due process, substantive or otherwise, and it gets real murky a lot of times. And so there gets to be some kind of gray area from the Supreme Court, which I think a lot of the conflict stems from, because it's kind of up to interpretation to a lot of people. I don't know if that kind of really melds with exactly what you were talking about, but I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding in that case. I don't see any other way around it. It's, if the federal government was, if the Congress was doing their job, you wouldn't be having a state law being fought at the Supreme Court level. You'd be fighting a federal law at the Supreme Court level, and I think things would be much clearer for people at that point. But we are only here because the Congress has abdicated their power to the point where we get legal rulings that act as essentially a makeshift legislature. I don't know if I would argue that the Supreme Court has too much power, because at the end of the day, there's no enforcement mechanism that the Supreme Court has to do any of these things.
True.
They have the U.S. Marshals, and they can barely even protect the actual justices when they're out in the public as it is. I mean, it's a tough deal for them to actually have any real teeth. The power in a Supreme Court comes from how society and the government as a whole reacts to their decisions.
And I would say the power that, the power they have now is whatever power is being abdicated, given to them by the abdication from Congress. That's like we were talking about, is their refusal to do anything about it is giving them the power that we can even interpret their decisions as legislation from the bench. And that is one of the inherent issues that I see in so much, a lot of different news companies talk about the approval rating of the Supreme Court. That doesn't fucking matter. Like you said, when they ruled on whatever was the case in Virginia.
Levin versus Virginia.
Yeah, so when they ruled that 20% of the United States
I'm glad they didn't take poll on that.
Right,
Yeah.
so that's not the point. The point is not a reflection of what the United States thinks at the time. It's what in the base and like what the right thing is. The right thing based on the Constitution for everybody's rights, right? Was that if, regardless of what color you are, you can marry who you want. That is the right thing. And in this case, the right decision, like you said, was that this isn't our decision to make. This decision needs to be made in a different branch because we took too much power by making it. And so I almost feel like they're ceding power from themselves and not even not necessarily giving it back, because it has to be taken, but it has to be accepted by Congress. They're just putting it out there. And that's where this gray area starts, because people are calling for Joe Biden to do something. And that's what gets us in. He signed an executive order yesterday about the federal protections they're going to have for medications. And people are asking him to allow people to do abortions on federal property and things like that. That is not how this works. And when you have an abdication of responsibility by Congress, when they give up chunks of their power, and there's it's not even I guess it's kind of a vacuum, but it's only a vacuum created by the demands of the people. And it's because we're asking for a decision, we're asking for something that no one wants to take accountability for. No one wants to make this decision. Who can?
Welcome to the salt of the streets, coming at you every week with this food for thought. Hope you ready to eat everything.